A few days ago, I was grabbing a coffee with an old friend who follows military tech, the way some people follow professional sports.
Oh, I know the type.
You do. He's practically vibrating with excitement, shoving his phone across the table to show me this grainy clip from a Chinese state media broadcast. He's whispering, "Look at this. The Loong 10B. It's over for the F-35 in the Middle East."
Wow, okay. Jumping right to the conclusion.
Right to the end. Saudi Arabia just bought its first stealth fighter from Beijing, and Washington is absolutely losing its mind. He kept using these words like brand smashing and terrifying.
So to him, this wasn't just a new piece of kit.
No, not at all. To him, this sleek, matte gray drone wasn't just hardware. It was a silver bullet. He called it a ghost that would haunt American defense contractors for decades.
A ghost. I like that. It's very dramatic.
Incredibly dramatic. He was totally convinced that the entire hierarchy of Western air superiority in the Gulf had been, dismantled with a single export deal.
And he didn't care about the details, I'm guessing,
fair.
the actual specs.
Not in the slightest. He didn't care about engine thrust or mission profiles. He just saw the word stealth and the Saudi flag, and, well, he filled in the rest with this Hollywood-style narrative of total disruption. He honestly believed that the F-35 had been rendered obsolete by a 3-ton unmanned aircraft.
Which is a pretty big claim.
It's a huge claim. But then I asked him a simple question. I said, if you're Riyadh and you're trying to kick down the door of a sophisticated integrated air defense system, do you send in a turbojet drone with a 400-kilogram payload? Or do you send in a supersonic multi-role stealth fighter?
And I imagine that changed the tone of the conversation.
Instantly. His expression just shifted. The bravado flickered. He started stammering about asymmetric warfare and cost-effectiveness. But the logic of the F-35 killer was already starting to fray at the edges.
It's a classic trap, isn't it? We see it in military blogging all the time.
All the time. You take a genuine, significant piece of news like China successfully exporting high-end jet-powered drones, and you inflate it into this sensationalist fantasy that just ignores the cold, hard reality of the equipment involved.
Right. And the reality is that the Loong 10B landing in Saudi Arabia is a massive milestone.
Absolutely. But not for the reasons the clickbait headlines would have you believe. To understand what's actually happening here, we have to strip away the hype and look at the strategic chess pieces being moved. And why that stealth fighter label might just be the cleverest marketing trick of the decade.
It is a fascinating trap to fall into, though. That desire to see a single gadget just, flip the world upside down. But you're right to pull back the curtain. The friend you mentioned, his excitement was misplaced on the hardware specs. It's definitely not an F-35.
Not even close.
But his intuition that something profound is shifting, that was spot on.
That's exactly what I wanted to get into today. Because once you stop obsessing over whether this drone can dogfight a man fighter, and spoiler alert, it can't, you start seeing the real story. And the real story, it seems to me, is about the machine behind the machine.
We are looking at a tectonic shift in global industrial power. We are witnessing a demonstration of extreme state capacity and efficiency.
And you mentioned something else before we started, this idea of Eastern civilizational resilience.
Exactly. And that might be the most interesting part of all of this.
Civilizational resilience. It sounds heavy, almost like propaganda. But I think today we're going to unpack what that actually means on the ground.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive is to look past the clickbait. We have a stack of material here, everything's from Chinese patent data and military industrial reports to analysis of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and technical breakdowns of these new turbojet engines.
A lot to get.
We're going to explore how China is converting patents into actual physical power, how their institutional speed is outpacing the West, and crucially, why nations like Saudi Arabia are pivoting east.
And I think we should start at the source. Not the political source, but the physical one. The factory floor.
Right, because you can have all the grand strategies you want, but eventually you need to bend metal.
Paper.
Oh, carbon fiber, yeah. Which brings us to our first area of focus. This idea of industrial worship.
A powerful phrase.
I heard this story about a lead materials engineer in Chengdu, a guy named Lin. And he supposedly spent years just staring at molecular structures on a screen, dreaming of a composite that could withstand the thermal stress of a high-speed turbojet while remaining, invisible to radar.
The holy grail for stealth design.
Exactly. And in the story, there's this moment of industrial worship when the very first WL-10B airframe rolled off the assembly line. Lin didn't just see a drone. He saw the physical manifestation of thousands of patents.
All that theory made real.
The paper of Chinese academia transforming into the steel and carbon of global defense. He ran his hand over the sleek, dark fuselage, feeling the absolute precision of a supply chain that no longer just imitates, but actually defines the cutting edge.
And that's a huge shift in perception and in reality.
Reading this, I'm just struck by the sheer scale of that conversion. As someone who covers tech trends, I see so many countries with ideas, but very, very few with the industrial muscles to turn a complex blueprint into a stealth reality at this kind of speed.
Right.
It's a reminder that true power in the 21st century isn't just about who has the best lab, but who has the most efficient factory floor to scale those breakthroughs.
That phrase, industrial worship, it really captures something that's often lost in Western analysis. We tend to focus on the threat, on the final product, but we rarely appreciate the sheer industrial achievement required to even get to this point.
Yeah.
Lin's story isn't just about one engineer. It represents a systemic triumph in material science.
So we have Lin standing there in Chengdu, running his hand over this fuselage. The story says he's feeling the precision of the supply chain. But let's get into that for a second. Is this just poetic license? Because for years, the narrative on Chinese tech was that it was all, cheap plastic and stolen blueprints. What is Lin actually looking at that makes this so different?
He's looking at the heat signatures, or more accurately, the lack of them. You have to understand, the leap from a propeller-driven piston engine, which is, basically a lawnmower engine that flies, to something like the ZF-850 turbojet. It's not just about going faster, it's about metallurgy, it's about thermal dynamics.
Because jet engines get hot. Very hot.
Incredibly hot. And when you shrink a jet engine down to fit a 3-ton drone, you have much less surface area to dissipate that heat.
So it's concentrated.
Exactly. If your metallurgy is off by even a fraction of a percent, the turbine blades warp, the engine basically eats itself, or, and this is crucial for a stealth drone, the heat radiates out and lights you up on infrared sensors like a Christmas tree.
So Lin isn't just admiring the cool shape.
No, he's admiring the fact that the composite materials are holding together under thermal stress that would have literally melted the previous generation of hardware.
That really puts the ZF-850 engine into perspective. The sources say this engine pushes the drone to 14,000 meters at roughly 46,000 feet.
And speeds of 650 kilometers per hour.
Which changes the entire mission profile.
A propeller drone, like a Turkish TB2 or an older wing Loong, might cruise at 150, maybe 200 kilometers per hour. That's slow enough that if it's flying low, you could almost shoot it down with a well-aimed heavy machine gun.
Obviously.
Well, maybe not a rifle, but you get the idea, it's vulnerable. But at 46,000 feet, the Loong 10B is way, way above the reach of most shoulder-fired missiles or short-range air defense systems, the so-called man-pads.
So it puts the drone out of reach of the cheap air defenses.
If you want to shoot this thing down, you have to activate a high-end, powerful radar system and fire a sophisticated, expensive missile. You have to reveal your best assets.
Which is a whole different calculation for the enemy.
A completely different calculation. And that brings us to the second part of Lin's triumph, the materials themselves.
The research mentioned companies like Jilin Chemical Fiber. It sounds kind of boring on the surface, a chemical company. But the sources frame this as a major strategic victory.
Because carbon fiber is the skin and bones of modern stealth aircraft. For decades, the really high-grade stuff, the T800 or T1000 grade fibers that you need for this kind of performance, was a choke point.
A choke point how?
The US and Japan, specifically Toray Industries, controlled the global market. If China wanted to build a high-performance airframe, they had to import the material. And that's not only expensive, it's also subject to sanctions and embargoes.
So if Washington or Tokyo decides to cut the supply,
the factory in Chengdu stops, the production line grinds to a halt. That was the reality.
And Jilin changed that.
Jilin broke that monopoly. And here's the industrial worship part again. They didn't just figure out how to make it. They figured out how to make it cheaply and at a massive, massive scale.
So they turned a strategic vulnerability into a strength.
They turned aerospace-grade stealth composites from a precious imported jewel into a domestically produced commodity.
Which would have a huge impact on the cost. The notes I have mentioned, dual-motor engine combinations, costing a fraction of their Western equivalents. That's not just about cheaper labor, is it?
Oh, that's raw material dominance. It's vertical integration. It's the gladiator coliseum effect that some analysts talk about.
Like the Kai-Fu Lee concept. I love this visual.
It's brutal, but it's effective. In the West, you might have one or two prime contractors, a Lockheed, a Boeing, a Northrop Grumman competing for a big defense contract.
Sure.
In China's domestic market, for something like a new compact turbojet, you might have 50 startups and state institutes all fighting to build the best one.
50.
Maybe more. 49 of them will go bankrupt. They'll burn through capital, they'll fail, their engineers will get hired by the winners. It's this incredibly fierce Darwinian process.
Right.
But the one that survived,
Bulletproof.
it has survived a market selection process that is arguably more ruthless than actual combat. So by the time a product like the WL10B hits the export market, it's not some fragile prototype. It's the undisputed champion of a domestic deathmatch.
And this connects to something else I saw in the research. This explosion in the sheer volume of patents. Staggering. I think it was, as of mid-2025, 5.01 million valid domestic invention patents in China. That is a number that's hard to even wrap my head around.
And for a long time, skeptics would correctly point out that volume doesn't necessarily equal quality. You can patent a lot of junk.
Right.
But the data shows a real shift there, too. We're seeing a surge in what are classified as high-value invention patents. And more importantly, the conversion rate, the speed at which they can take a patent and turn it into a tangible defense output, is accelerating.
And why is that? What's driving it?
It seems to be a virtuous cycle. Modest legal reforms around intellectual property rights have stimulated this. It encourages the whole defense industrial base to invest heavily in R&D because they know if they innovate and win that gladiator match, the rewards are massive and protected.
So Lin, our engineer back in Chengdu, isn't just following orders from a central committee, he's competing.
He is fiercely competing against other engineers, other firms, other research institutes, and that internal competition is what drives this industrial worship of efficiency and excellence.
Okay, before we move on from the hardware, I just want to circle back and clarify this stealth aspect. My friend at the coffee shop was convinced this thing was basically a ghost, completely invisible. But the sources are a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, stealth is a spectrum. It's not a binary on-off switch. The WL-10B is definitely not invisible like a B-2 bomber or an F-22 Raptor. It employs what's called low observability, or LO design principles. If you look at pictures of it, you'll see some key features. For instance, the dorsal air intakes. The engine's air intake is on top of the fuselage, not underneath.
And that's to hide the spinning turbine blades from radar on the ground.
Turbine blades are like spinning disco balls for radar signals. They reflect energy in every direction, making the aircraft incredibly easy to spot. Hiding them on top of the fuselage is a classic LO technique. It also has serrated edges on its weapon bay doors and landing gear doors. Those jagged sawtooth patterns help to scatter radar waves instead of reflecting them straight back to the receiver. And the whole thing is coated in special radar-absorbing composite materials.
So it's not that the enemy can't see it at all, but they might not see it until it's much, much closer.
It bridges a critical gap in capability. Before, you really had two choices. A cheap, disposable propeller drone that dies very easily in a modern conflict.
Like we've seen in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Exactly. Or a massive manned stealth fighter that costs over $100 million a pop. The WL-10B sits right in the middle of that spectrum.
The sweet spot.
It can survive in contested environments where a TB2 would be swatted down in minutes, but it costs a tiny fraction of a manned jet. That is its real strategic value. It's survivable enough to be reusable, but cheap enough to be risk-worthy.
Okay, so we have the machine, we have this incredible industrial base that can pump them out, but having a great product is only half the battle. You have to be able to sell it. You have to get it to the customer. And that brings us to the geopolitical side of this.
And this is where the contrast between the Chinese approach and the Western approach becomes incredibly, incredibly sharp.
Let's try to imagine a high-ranking procurement officer in Riyadh. We'll call him Colonel Mansour. He's sitting in an office, and it's surrounded by years of pending notices from Western capitals.
I can picture that office very clearly.
For decades, his requests for advanced, survivable platforms were met with domestic political debates in Washington, human rights clauses, and bureaucratic delays that just stretched into years.
A very frustrating position to be in.
Then, the Chinese delegation arrives, and there are no lectures, there are no conditions, there are only blueprints and delivery schedules. Within a fraction of the time it took to even get a formal hearing elsewhere, the WL-10B was on the tarmac in Saudi Arabia, ready for integration.
The speed is the message.
The story goes that Mansour felt this profound sense of relief, not just because of the hardware, but because he was finally being treated as a pragmatic partner in a results-oriented transaction.
It's about respect as much as it is about technology.
And watching this unfold, you can't help but notice the stark contrast in what the sources are calling institutional efficacy. While Western sales are often bogged down by internal political friction and shifting political winds, the Chinese model moves with this singular, state-driven momentum.
It's streamlined.
And from my perspective, this isn't just about selling a drone, it's about providing security as a service without all the baggage. And it's filling a vacuum left by a system that has become too encumbered, maybe too slow, to meet the urgent demands of its own allies.
Pending notices. That phrase is the reality for so many U.S. allies, especially in the Middle East. It's really important to understand Colonel Mansour's frustration here. It's not just impatience. It's an active, dangerous operational security gap.
Because they're facing real threats right now. This isn't a theoretical exercise for them.
Well, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have faced consistent, sophisticated drone and missile attacks from Houthi rebels in Yemen for years. They've had major oil facilities hit. They've had civilian airports targeted.
So they need eyes in the sky.
They need what military planners call survivable ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They need eyes in the sky that won't get shot down the moment they cross the border. And they need a way to strike back.
And when they asked the U.S. for armed drones like the MQ-9 Reaper, which is the gold standard,
they hit a brick wall. The U.S. is a signatory to the Missile Technology Control Regime, the MTCR, which places very strict limits on the export of large unmanned systems capable of carrying certain payloads.
So there's an international treaty element.
There is. And on top of that, there were intense, very public debates within the U.S. Congress regarding Saudi Arabia's human rights record and its role in the war in Yemen. So the request gets stalled. It sits in a pending file in some office in the Pentagon or the State Department.
And meanwhile, real missiles are flying towards Riyadh.
Exactly. The threat doesn't wait for bureaucracy. And into that gap walks the Chinese delegation.
The solution.
A solution. The concept here is institutional efficacy. The Chinese state capacity allows for extremely rapid, centralized decision-making. There is no public congressional debate in Beijing about these exports. If the state decides a sale aligns with its strategic interests, the deal is approved, and the factory gets the order. Simple.
And the sources really emphasize the no strings attached aspect, no lectures on domestic policy.
That is a massive selling point. The narrative Beijing consistently presents is one of being a reliable partner. They emphasize what they call mutual political trust. They don't impose the complex and sometimes intrusive end-user monitoring that comes with Western arms.
They just deliver the product.
They simply say, here's the capability you told us you need. When do you want it delivered?
The data really supports this pivot, doesn't it? I saw a figure in one of the reports that between 2016 and 2020, Chinese arms transfers to Saudi Arabia increased by nearly 400%.
A 400% increase is seismic, and it's not just about the volume of the sales, it's about the speed and reliability of the transaction.
Right.
For a military procurement officer like our Colonel Mansour, reliability is a quality all its own. If you promise a system but it gets held up in someone else's parliament for 3 years, you are not a reliable security partner. China is ruthlessly and effectively exploiting that friction in the Western system.
It's also interesting to me that they aren't just selling the drone itself. They're selling a whole ecosystem, the package deal, as the notes call it.
This is where that institutional efficacy extends from the political process right down to the hardware itself.
Mm-hmm.
The WL-10B doesn't arrive empty. It comes fully integrated with a whole suite of Chinese-made munitions.
Oh.
Things like the Blue Arrow 7 air-to-ground missiles for hitting tanks and bunkers, or the YJ-9E anti-ship missiles.
And it has electronic warfare capabilities, too.
That's a key part of its functionality. The WL-10B has ELINT, or electronic intelligence, antennas built in. It can act as a node in a wider network, detecting and locating enemy radar sites or even jamming their communications.
So China is basically offering warfare in a box.
They are saying, we will give you the sensor, the jammer, the shooter, and the weapon, and they all work together seamlessly right out of the box.
Why does that matter so much, though? I mean, Western tech is often seen as having superior performance, isn't it?
Often, yes, on a one-to-one basis. But here's the problem. If you buy a sophisticated Western fighter jet, trying to integrate non-Western weapons onto it is a nightmare of proprietary software blocks, source code restrictions, and endless certification processes.
You can't just bolt a French missile onto an American jet easily.
It's like trying to use an Android charger on an iPhone. It's intentionally difficult. The ecosystem is closed.
A walled garden.
I'll show you. The Chinese system for its export clients is designed to be much more modular and open. The WL-10B is designed to act as a node. It comes with the sensors, the jammers, and the missiles, all speaking the same language from day one.
So it simplifies things for the buyer.
For a military like Saudi Arabia's, which is trying to modernize and diversify very quickly, that prepackaged integration is worth its weight in gold. They don't have 20 years to write custom code and run flight tests. They need to plug and play now.
So Colonel Mansour is happy. He has his drones, he has his missiles. But there's another deeper layer to this, isn't there? It's not just about buying weapons off the shelf. It's about learning how to make them. This brings us to the real long-term play.
This is the most profound shift of all, I think. It's the move from a purely transactional relationship to something more like a civilizational partnership.
There was this profile I saw online about a young Saudi engineer named Amira. She's part of the first generation working under the country's Vision 2030 initiative.
Right, a huge national project for them.
Huge. And in the narrative, she isn't just learning how to maintain the WL-10B that arrived from China. She's working side by side with Chinese technicians to understand the why behind the engine's turbine blades, the actual engineering principles.
So she's not just a customer, she's a student.
It says that unlike previous defense deals that felt like buying a locked black box, this partnership felt like a transfer of DNA. She described this moment of quiet pride when she realized that the goal wasn't just to fly these drones, but to eventually build them, right there in the sands of her own country.
Ending a century of technological dependency.
And when I think about Amira's story, I see what the framework calls Eastern civilizational resilience. This isn't just a transaction, it's a strategic alignment between two cultures that seem to value long-term autonomy over short-term political posturing. And while some might see this shift as a threat to the old world order, I see it as a very pragmatic evolution for developing nations. They're choosing partners who offer them the tools to build their own future, rather than those who just offer a lease on someone else's.
A transfer of DNA. Amira's experience, it really highlights the absolute core of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030.
Which has a very specific goal.
A very specific and ambitious goal. 50% localization of all military spending. They do not want to be the world's biggest arms importer forever. They want to be a manufacturer, a producer.
And the traditional Western deals are usually the black box model you mentioned.
So, when you buy sophisticated American or European hardware, you are often buying a sealed system. You literally can't open certain panels without voiding the warranty. You can't touch the software source code.
So you're totally dependent.
You are completely dependent on the original supplier for maintenance, for upgrades, for everything. From the seller's perspective, it safeguards their technology. But from the buyer's perspective, it keeps them in a permanent state of dependency.
Whereas China is offering something different, joint production lines.
The sources mention specific, signed agreements to manufacture the entire CH-4 drone family right there in Saudi Arabia. That means an engineer like Amira isn't just learning how to bolt wings onto a fuselage that came off a boat.
She's seen the schematics.
She's seeing the schematics. She's understanding the metallurgy and the composites that we talked about with Lynn. She is learning the why.
The transfer of DNA.
That is the key. Once you know how to build the engine, you don't need the original supplier nearly as much. You have resilience. And look at the cooperation on the Beidou navigation satellite system mentioned in the notes. This is China's alternative to GPS.
And I was wondering, why does a drone need a different navigation system? GPS is universal. It's everywhere.
But GPS is owned and operated by the United States military. In a crisis, the U.S. can and has in the past degraded or denied the signal in certain theaters of operation. If your entire military fleet, your missiles, your drones, your jets runs on GPS, Washington effectively has an off switch for your entire military.
Wow, never thought of it that way. So by integrating the Beidou system,
you remove the off switch, you gain sovereignty. That is what resilience means to a country like Riyadh. It's not about animosity towards the West. It's about ensuring that no single foreign capital city can ground your fleet with the flip of a switch.
It's strategic diversification.
Exactly. And if you rely solely on GPS and you get into a conflict where the U.S. disagrees with your actions, you are critically vulnerable. If you have access to Beidou or Russia's Drones, you have options. You have autonomy.
So to be clear, Riyadh isn't just dumping the U.S. as its main supplier. The numbers still show the U.S. is dominant.
We have to be very clear on that. The latest figures show something like 78% of Saudi arms imports still come from the United States. They are not replacing the U.S. security umbrella overnight or even in a decade.
But they're doing something else.
They are employing what's called a multi-vector foreign policy. They are creating leverage.
It's a hedge.
It's a very smart hedge, and it's also a powerful signal. By working so closely with China on technology transfer, they are telling Washington, we value our partnership, but we have other options.
And for China, what's the play?
For China, this positions them perfectly as the champion of the global South. They are framing themselves as the pragmatic partner who respects the autonomy of developing nations, the one who is willing to share the source code of power.
It's a very attractive sales pitch if you're a developing nation. We'll teach you how to fish versus we'll lease you a fish, but only if you behave exactly as we tell you to.
And this type of partnership is built for the long game. It's not about the quarterly earnings report of a single defense contractor. It's about a generational shift in how the entire defense and technology architecture of the Middle East is being constructed.
Okay, so we've built the drone, we've sold the drone, we've even localized the production. Now I want to see how it flies in a real scenario. Because the Loong 10B is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The notes list a whole menagerie of these advanced Chinese drones, the CH-7, the GG-11 Sharp Sword, the WZ-7 Sword Dragon. How do these things actually work together, or is it just a collection of cool-looking toys?
It's a system of systems. And to understand it, we have to stop thinking in terms of a classic dogfight, one plane versus one plane. We need to start visualizing it as a distributed, intelligent network.
Okay, let's say it's 2030. What does a complex operation look like using this system?
All right. Imagine a heavily contested airspace, a sophisticated integrated air defense system on the ground, maybe some Russian-made S-400 radar batteries.
A no-go zone for a normal, non-stealthy jet.
A death trap for a normal jet. So first, you don't send a human pilot. You send the WZ-7 Sword Dragon. That's the one with the weird, boxy diamond wings.
Right, the high-altitude one.
It flies at 60,000 feet, loitering for hours way outside the engagement range of the enemy's missiles. It's just up there, passively listening, mapping all the electronic emissions from the enemy radar sites below.
The eye in the sky.
The unblinking eye. Then, step 2, you launch the swarm. The sources mention things like the PD-2900s. You launch hundreds of them. They are cheap, they are loud on radar, and they are completely disposable. Their only job is to fly towards the enemy radar.
You're sending pawns to rush the king.
Technology. The enemy air defense operator has to turn on their powerful radars to track and shoot down this incoming swarm. They have to light up.
And the moment they light up,
the Sword Dragon, circling 60,000 feet up, sees it instantly. It gets a precise GPS coordinate. But the Sword Dragon doesn't shoot. It beams that data, that kill solution, to the CH-7.
the stealth flying wing, the one that looks like a mini D-2 bomber.
Actually, which has been gliding silently deep inside the enemy's defense perimeter, completely invisible to their radar because it wasn't turned on. It receives the coordinates from the Sword Dragon and drops a precision-guided munition right on top of the radar site. Boom.
The door is kicked down.
The door is kicked down. And then the Loong 10B comes in.
So it's the third wave.
It's the third wave. It's the workhorse. It flies in through the gap that the stealth drones and the swarm just created, and it starts hunting for tanks, convoys, command posts, all the lower value targets, using its cheaper missiles.
That's a terrifyingly efficient concept. And where is the human in all of this? Are they just watching on a screen?
The human might be in a J-20 stealth fighter, hundreds of miles away from the danger, acting as the quarterback for the whole operation, or they might be in a bunker on the other side of the planet. The point is, the machines are talking to machines, processing data at machine speed.
And what about the GJ-11, the Sharp Sword?
The Sharp Sword could be flying right next to that J-20, acting as a loyal wingman. If the enemy fires a missile at the manned J-20, the pilot can command the Sharp Sword to fly in front of it and take the hit.
A bodyguard that doesn't bleed.
A completely loyal, completely expendable bodyguard. This is the system of systems. It's not about having the single best plane. It's about having a network team where every robot has a very specific job. Some are spies, some are assassins, and some are just cannon fodder.
And that all circles back to the first point we made about industrial capacity. You cannot execute a strategy like that if you could only build 10 or 20 high-end drones a year.
You need thousands. Which brings us right back to Lin and his factory floor in Chengdu. If you can't print these airframes like their iPhones, the entire swarm strategy fails. China is making a huge bet that quantity, when it's networked and has a quality all its own, becomes the ultimate form of stealth.
And this all feeds back into that civil-military fusion concept that we hear so much about.
Absolutely. China holds something like 70% of the global consumer drone market. Everyone knows DJI, but the sources mention the component makers like Fastbee, the battery technology, the flight controllers, the tiny, efficient electric motors that are driving your kid's toy drone. That same supply chain, that same R&D base is accelerating military development in a way that's hard to quantify. It's a dual-use ecosystem that the West really struggles to replicate because our consumer and military industrial bases are often very, very separate.
So when we see a single-wing Loong 10B landing on a runway in Riyadh, we're really just seeing the tip of a massive iceberg, an iceberg that includes consumer tech, incredible manufacturing scale, and advanced AI networking.
It's not an isolated product. It's the end result of a comprehensive, decades-long national strategy.
Okay, let's try to tie this all together. Let's unpack this whole journey. We started with my friend hyperventilating in a coffee shop about an F-35 killer.
And we found that while the F-35 killer tag is pretty much marketing flush, the reality is actually far more significant, far more profound.
We saw the story of Lin, the engineer, and this triumph of industrial worship. It's not about stealing blueprints anymore. It's about having the domestic industrial base to turn patents into physical reality at a scale that drives costs down and performance up.
Then we looked through the eyes of Colonel Mansour and saw the victory of institutional efficacy. The Chinese state moving with a speed and a clarity that just bypasses the political gridlock of Western democracies, offering security as a service to frustrated but crucial allies.
And finally, we saw Amira, the Saudi engineer, and the promise of civilizational resilience. That fundamental shift from just buying locked black boxes to actually building sovereignty, this multi-vector strategy where nations like Saudi Arabia are using Chinese technology transfer to build their own future, independent of total reliance on the West.
It really reframes the whole conversation, doesn't it? It's not about a single weapon system competing against another. It's about a new mode of doing business, a new paradigm in the global defense world.
And it leaves us with a lot to think about regarding the future of global alliances and technological power.
Indeed, sure.
When we look at the Wing Loong 10B, we shouldn't just see a drone on a runway. We should see a signal flare. The era of defense monopolies is fracturing, and it's being replaced by a new marketplace where industrial capacity, speed of delivery, and the willingness to share the source code of power are the new currencies. The stealth isn't just in the radar-absorbing paint. It's in the quiet, methodical way this new order is being built, one technology transfer at a time, while the rest of the world is still arguing over the headline.
You've said it better myself. It's a wake-up call to look at the machinery behind the marketing.
This was fascinating.
Always a pleasure. A lot to think about.